Start
Recording.
But not to make like a long-winded spiel out of it, just
You're fine.
just the only thing I would say is that because my students get mad at me if I get overly like dismissive about these things, because I don't think it's a good thing to, especially with ADHD and the kids in my class and their anxiety. Like, it always becomes like an identity and a crutch and an IEP, and then they don't have to. I mean, there's a lot of kids who really need it, but there's a lot of kids who take advantage of it. But anyway, so I'll tell them, like, don't let the diagnosis kind of define your behavior and all that stuff. And but the point I was making was that they diagnosed like a pattern of behavior, because psychology doesn't diagnose based off of like in the same way that other, like, I guess everything kind of does. But yeah, I mean, there are so many traits that would put you into a category, and I don't think that there's like any particular human being who won't fit into some diagnostic category these days, because they're so broad. So I guess that's the only point I'm making.
Yeah, man. True that.
I didn't start being like, okay, maybe I have ADHD. Like I said, I was diagnosed when I was 13. Until like I started being a teacher and doing IEP meetings with kids who have ADHD, and then I learned a little bit about executive dysfunction. I was like, okay, that has definitely been a problem my whole life.
That's interesting too, because I always wonder too, like, how many people out there have these undiagnosed ailments and are completely functional? Like, what if there's people out there with full-blown schizophrenia who just made it work for them somehow? Who just like are like, yeah, I see shit, but it helps me do math or whatever. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're not going
to Einstein.
Yeah, Einstein. Yeah.
Who knows?
I mean, the only illness really is isolation, because if you're in a community full of people where everybody has like the same sort of patterns of mental activity that you have, then that's just the way of life that you all share, and what we really diagnose are like patterns of mental activity that are isolating to people, that make it so that they can't function in the way that the majority of people function, that brings us together, whether it be, appropriate behavior or being able to hold a job or whatever it may be. But yeah, I'm just like, imagine a society full of people with we're like a society built by only schizophrenic people. It may look different, but if they had a community together, they'd have some agreement about what's true. They'd have some way of life that is mostly agreed upon. I don't know. This is why I don't drink coffee.
Oh no, drinking that. What do you guys think? What do you guys think about all this society and mental illness and psychology? And
I think it's a fun thought experiment to like basically run through those simulations that Michael was saying. Like, what would society look like if it was run by fully schizophrenic people? But it's obviously like kind of impossible to tell. But yeah, it's fun to imagine. But yeah, it highlights a big thing that people kind of overlook, that like society basically sets the rules. We're currently in a society, and the rules set, people are suffering. I don't know where I'm going. I'm tired. This has been a long day.
It's all good, dude. All good in the hood. So anybody got... Oh, go ahead, Edward. Sorry, Edward. Go ahead.
It's all good. It's like we don't have to imagine it too hard, because there's so much dysfunction already in society.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think. Yeah. Well, I also see a lot of function too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's almost amazing how it functions well. We always focus on the negative, but it when you think about the bright side, there's this one cartoon I saw where this guy's in a beautiful beach, in a beautiful setting, like the artist made it purposely beautiful atmosphere. And he's looking at his phone and he's just like, this world's going to hell. Because he's like
Yeah.
on social media, but there's like children playing in the background with kites and shit.
That's good.
Yeah. 99% of the time, usually, like, I look around me and it's just, you know, beautiful scenery and chill atmosphere. And that's kind of the trick of society and the government. Kind of the trick of Mara really is making you think the more you give your attention to this shit, the more real it becomes. There is no government. There's some police on the streets. There's some buildings made of brick. There's some cages in a building somewhere. But there's no government. It's an idea. You know what I mean? And they don't want you to figure that out. They want you talking about them, even if it's negative. They love that too, because it gives them the air of mystery, and it makes you fearful, and then they can control you easier. And that's kind of like Mara, you know. If you forget about Mara, there ain't no problems. You know?
You think Mara is the military or just a part of it?
It's all illusion. Whatever we bring up with labels that isn't relaxing in the breath, it's just all descriptive illusions, one after another. That's what I think. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
You know,
Go ahead, buddy.
I was going to say that every once in a while I come across a single phrase that completely changes how I experience the world. And one that I can't remember exactly where I heard it or if I thought it. Another symptom of ADHD, by the way. Terrible recollection. But I've been bringing it to mind often. And it's two things, because what you just said, you know, everything is illusion, and there's a wrong way that people can take that can be harmful, which is to think that when we say everything is an illusion, that everything is unreal. So, like, yeah, the first part was that the word illusion doesn't mean that something is not real. It just means that it's not what it appears to be, like a mirage, you know. As water, it's an illusion, but as a reflection of light, it's real, right? So, and then using the same example, the second part that really helped me out was that when you see an illusion for what it actually is, the illusion doesn't disappear, ignorance disappears. I've said this before, and I just love that because it clarifies so much. So if you just use a mirage as an example, if you were in the middle of the desert, let's say you were at a safe place in the desert, and off in the distance you saw this big lake full of water, and you decided, like, I'm going to go and collect water and bring it back to this resort where they don't have water. I'm going to make a bunch of money selling water. This is obviously a totally fictional scenario. And then you went off on this journey to collect water from this beautiful, glistening blue lake off in the distance. And you had all of these empty jugs that you were going to fill with the water. And then you were going to go and you're going to make all this money. And so, you know, you're struggling, you're sweating, you're dehydrated. Now you're out in the middle of the desert. The resort that you left is way behind you. And the only thing that's in front of you is this big body of water that you've been dreaming about. And, you know, that you've been struggling to get to it. You've been suffering to get to it. You've been thinking about it. You've been worrying about, what about this? What about that? You know, am I getting too far from the resort? You know, is there going to be enough water when I get there? All of these things, you have all these stories in your mind. You have this whole identity. I'm the person who's going to get the water and sell the water. So you built up all this desire and fear and worry and identity. And then for whatever reason, suddenly you realize that the body of water that you're heading towards is actually a mirage, right? It looks like a body of water, but it's actually a mirage. A mirage is you know, a collection of heat waves reflecting the light off the sky, so it looks like water. So at that moment, the illusion doesn't disappear, but the ignorance disappears. You no longer think it's a body of water. You still see the same image. You still see the body of water, but you know it's not a body of water now, so in that moment, ignorance disappears. The body of water that held so much meaning to you, let's just say your whole life in this analogy, it loses all meaning. It becomes empty. Your desire for it goes away. Your fear of not getting it goes away. Your whole identity as one who is going to get it goes away. So with the undermining of ignorance, with the undercutting of ignorance, everything that arose dependent on that ignorance about the mirage disappears with it. It's, but the illusion is still there. The appearance is still there. And I feel like
that's a good distinction, because it also takes us back to the Four Noble Truths too. It's not illusion that's a problem. And even I remember seeing or hearing a talk from Ajahn Sumedho over here. It said even desire isn't the problem. It's the attachment to the desire, the negative attachments. Desire is desire. Illusion's illusions. Whether it's real, how real it is, or how fake is irrelevant. Are you attached to it? And is this attachment a negative attachment that's causing us dukkha? And how you doing, Ivan? I don't know if his camera's for. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Good, dude.
I'm doing good.
Nice. Yeah. Anybody have anything on their mind they want to talk about Dhamma wise? We're just discussing illusions, and Michael brought up a good point. Somebody comment on Discord. It's going to join later. Luke. Oh, come join us, Luke, if you want. Sorry, go ahead, Ivan.
I have a quick question. Since Michael is here, I was just thinking about the feathers. Is it possible? So there's lower feathers and higher feather. Is it that someone has to go through the lower feather before someone can cut one of those higher feather? Like conceit is like on the ninth feather, right? Is this too intellectual? I'm just curious.
No, I don't. It's not that. I would say that the traditional perspective on that is that you don't even think about the higher fetters until you've abandoned the lower fetters.
I see.
And I mean, I guess the reason I'm laughing is because probably just because I've been avoiding thinking too technically. My normal habit is to be really always thinking about the suttas and what they mean, and I think I've spent the past month just not even thinking about them. So, but anyway, that's a personal thing. But yeah, I mean, I think that can only really be speculative in a way, if whether or not the fetters are abandoned in the order of 10 that they're listed. It appears that that's how they are. That's the way it appears to be in the suttas. And I've sometimes wondered if the Buddha put conceit as the second to last or the third to last fetter because of how sort of arrogant and dogmatic people tend to get when they really get into the Dhamma. This is the right way to understand it. This is you only can understand it this way. It has to happen in this order, or it can't happen in that order, and only this monk is reading the suttas correctly, and that monk's not reading them correctly. That word's not translated right, and this word's not translated. All of this, all of this, intellectualization of the teachings, and so perhaps the Buddha listed conceit as one of the higher fetters because perhaps early on, beginner's mind, beginner's luck, we see the Dhamma, we see the deathless, which if I could put that into less esoteric language, and this is a little bit of what I was getting at with the whole concept of the illusion doesn't disappear, only ignorance disappears. Another way of thinking of that fundamental ignorance in Buddhism is that we don't seem to know, and Dhammadasa, you point this out all the time, that peace, love, and happiness, that old hippie cliche, that's just what our true nature is. Like our experience of peace is when we get past that veil of boredom, anxiety, and stupidity, and the mind's able to rest within itself. That's the experience of deep, deep peace. The experience of love, in my opinion, is when the mind goes outside of itself, but not in a fragmented, diluted way where it feels like a separate entity within a body, but it's that sense of separation is not there. So when it goes out, it's not going outside of itself. It's just engaged in intimacy with other aspects of itself in a way, and that experience is what we call love. When ignorance is not there, and then happiness is just that, both that peace and that love, like being your primary experience. Which we normally only experience happiness when a desire ceases, because we're caught in desire all the time. But when desire ceases, it just reveals the state that's always already there. So, the world remains the same in appearance, but our lack of understanding that the feeling of being isolated and separated and unsatisfied is all an illusion. That's the primary delusion that we have. When that's not there, then the natural state of the mind of being peaceful and being happy can be enjoyed all the time. It's not like the organism that you are loses its preferences. You can still enjoy experiences that are more delightful than others, but you just have like a bit more open heart, more presence with it. Like
I think it's important to note what Dhammarato always says when talking about the insignificance of noting and discriminating between types of dukkha. Oh, this dukkha is this, and this dukkha is this, and this dukkha is this. Let's taste the dog shit. Let's examine it. Let's see what kind it is. Dhammarato is like, no, just walk around it. Doesn't matter what kind of dukkha it is. Doesn't matter. It's dukkha. Walk around it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, otherwise you will get caught in the game of, is it this, is it? And it's interesting. I mean, they wrote these things down because they're interesting and have some inherent value. It's not that it's completely, let's just throw the baby away with the bathwater, but we keep in mind the marrow of the bone of the practice, of the Dhamma practice. Hi, anybody else who joined?
Hello.
So anybody else got anything on their mind, Dhamma related? Or anybody want to put in their 2 cents on what Ivan was talking about? Which was different types of fetters.
I have a question about the aggregates. How can we use the aggregates for more clarity, for clear seeing?
Anybody want to answer that? I'm not too familiar with aggregates.
Well, what I would say is that you already know what the aggregates are. You just don't call it that. The aggregates are just what the Buddha called the ways in which we experiencing. I'll say the way he categorized phenomenal experience. Right. So we experience materiality. We experience a physical world. In the what's the word I'm looking for?
The different senses.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about it in the sense of the 4 elements, solidity. I'm not going to go through all of it. He talked about materiality in the sense of the 4 elements, and in the senses, and connected to sense experiences, feeling,
smelling, tasting,
perception, mental formations, consciousness, all that stuff. But the point is that that you already experience this in this way. You might call it different. You might call it sensation, perception, cognition. You might call it thinking, feeling, mood, emotion, whatever it may be. But the way that the aggregates help to elicit clarity is related to that old expression, like you can't see the forest for the trees, right? When someone says you can't see have you heard that before? Edward, have you heard that expression? when someone can't see the forest for the trees, what that expression is saying is that you're sort of taking something as a unified whole that's really made up of different parts in a way. And if you understand the parts that make up the whole, you can understand like the object of experience that's occurring right now. Like if you see somebody stealing from Safeway and you just look at the person who's stealing from Safeway or whatever market, and you just like, okay, that person's a thief. But then if you went inside their life and you saw like whatever different components and conditions led to the action of stealing, then you have a greater insight into like what led to that behavior rather than just looking at the behavior itself. I don't know why that's the example I went to, but when the Buddha talks about the 5 aggregates, he wants us to sort of break that Sakkaya Ditthi, which is the perception of like a unified entity here living life, and understand that it's actually just like a collection of different domains of activities that they're different activities of the same thing, but you know, it's the activity of experiencing materiality, the activity of experiencing feeling, the activity of experiencing perception, the activity of experiencing thinking, the activity of experiencing sensory consciousness. So it's just a way of sort of breaking what, like in an educational paradigm, we'd call a fixed mindset. You know, like if you fall in love with somebody and you develop like a fixed image of who that person is, and then in the next week they are slightly different, you may not notice, but maybe in a year the person has changed and your image of them has changed, and then that's no longer the person you fell in love with because you're held on to a fixed you've created a fixed entity in your mind. By seeing things in terms of the aggregates, it helps to prevent the mind from creating like that objectification of your own experience primarily, but others as well, so that you can eventually just kind of see everything as an ownerless unfolding of nature, whose basic nature is experience, really. I mean, we know that for sure, right? We know that the nature of nature is to experience because we are nature and we are experiencing, right? We're experiencing all these different ways. And as long as we don't sort of like try to take control of the whole process, then we won't suffer it. I don't know.
So everything changes.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I appreciate the answer. I got to get going though, guys. I'll probably see y'all later.
Bye.
Appreciate
Have a
everybody.
good
See ya.
Bye, dude.
I've got a question, if I can ask, if we have time. Just curious, how is everybody dealing with the news cycle at the moment, if at all? Like, are people avoiding it, or are you checking it but trying to practice the Dharma as you do so? Just interested to know what's working for people in that front, because I'm sort of torn between cold turkey and as soon as I get slightly lured into a headline, I end up sort of checking it hour by hour, and that's obviously not a good approach. So just curious to know how other people are dealing with that.
Good question.
Well, other people, how are you dealing with it?
I just completely avoid it. Whatever ends up on my like page, I'll read it, but I will not go researching it. It's just that I've been in a really bad cycle with news before, and I just have to avoid it. Like, it's the only way to fully keep it out of mind and out of like out to keep it from causing dissatisfaction and all sorts of negative emotion. And yeah.
Good.
I had an interesting thought about that. I kind of keep it outdated, but I'm not sure why it doesn't bother me. Maybe because I see this play out many times before. Well, I say I see many times play. I'm talking about my mind. I'm talking about I know how funny my mind can be. It's jumping to conclusion. I know how funny my mind trying to make up story that is not basic reality. Um, I think I'm not bothered by it because I know what my mind is doing. So that's my answer.
Yeah, it's a good question, and
Yes, Jonas.
I would guess I can start by just saying how I'm dealing with it. Like I can't. Well, first of all, it's unavoidable for me because I have one side of my family who's ethnically connected to one side, and I have the other side of my family who's ethnically connected to the other side. And there's definitely like feelings that make their way into these conversations I have with my family that are connected to, that strong like historical, cultural, genetic identification that's there. Like my mom is from Morocco. She's Muslim. My dad's Jewish. And so like just the situation that I guess is like one of the larger ones in the news cycle right now is sort of personally connected to my life. So I wouldn't really be able to avoid it even if I wanted to. And I'm not going to go into my thoughts on that stuff either. But what I would say is that the way that I intuitively respond to stuff like this is to be open to it completely. And then first see how my own sort of identifications respond to it. Because yesterday definitely had a certain effect on parts of my being, and I sort of just allowed it and watched it throughout the day until it sort of lightened up a little bit. But my intuitive response to the news cycle or to seeing some days, when the weather is a certain way, all of the very desperate sort of homeless people come out and, looking at them and seeing their suffering. And then my mind goes and enters their experience and tries to look at the world through their eyes, or, tries to do that even in the news cycle. My response always is to broaden the context, essentially, and not to go to the broadest possible context, which is my general practice that I talk about, which is to sort of see everything as arising and passing, or experience everything as arising and passing within the same space of awareness that doesn't belong to me or anybody, but is completely impersonal. But that's such a broad context that it makes ordinary everyday life very light, very pleasant. But when it comes to things like this, I feel that abiding in that broadest possible context, as I like to call it, just as impersonal awareness, can be it can make me too detached when responding to other people, or too distant or aloof from whatever responsibility that my particular expression of life might have in this situation. So then I try to bring it down to like close to the context, but not as close as most people experience it, where they're on the downstream side of the history and they're only understanding how things that are happening now are being represented right now, because history is not a solid thing. It can't be. It's just impossible. It is a collection of competing narratives that when one narrative is thought to be true by the largest group of people at one time, and then whenever the new narrative is thought to be true by the people are constantly changing their opinion on what is historical fact. So that's one part of the context. But I personally in this situation, you know, kind of have a lot of different narratives of history that I'm aware of, right? And in this particular conflict. So I think about both of those. And then I start to think about, you know, even just like global history and the way human beings have been doing these things forever. And just to make a long story short, what usually ends up being clarified as I keep broadening the context is that deciding who's good and who's bad, who's the villain and who's the victim is not as easy as we want it to be from our very temporal spatial standpoint as a person living in a society during a particular time in a particular place. And if you sort of take the God's eye view of things, I guess you can say, things are seen to be moving in this way continuously throughout human history. And you could even see sort of how these things are governed by the stuff that the Buddha talks about: greed, hatred, delusion, you know, identity and competition.
It all stems from dukkha too. All the wars, all that stuff. It's just chasing dukkha, ignorance, avidya. It's just like Michael made the important distinction between illusions and how it's, you know, some illusions may have some bits of reality or whatever, but news, you know, just like illusions, it is what it is. You know, it's just a phenomenon that arises and falls. And you can have fun with it. You can watch the news if you want, but if it causes you dukkha, if you know it causes you dukkha, then just shut it off. It's not important, you know.
I just want to say, like, I think it's so interesting because when you see two sides, like both from whichever, like Israel or Iran, I'm not sure which one you guys talking about. Like when I read from their perspective, everyone has their own narrative, like what Michael says. I'm trying not to use the word fascinating because it sounds like being too detached, but I'm not sure if there's a better word to describe it. It's so interesting. I remember I just read a book about this. Something about they used like in Buddhism, they used to have like a conference, is it? Like between two countries, Palestine and Israel. I forgot what the emphasis was, like that Buddhism in general doesn't take sides. Like throughout history, they tend to stay very neutral. I think Thich Nhat Hanh says something like this. He says, because once you take side, whether it's whichever, that's not the goal. Like ignorance, like everyone suffer. Like there's no real good or evil. Maybe it's too extreme, but that's how they see it. I think it's interesting. But yeah, that's all.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that subject?
I would just add, because I know I have a tendency, just my way of thinking can sound very abstract from the outside, is that for Thomas, I would say if there is a need to take it in and empathize with what's going on, sometimes you have to discern like your truest intuition. And for me, sometimes to discern my truest intuition, I literally have to like completely throw Buddhism away. Like I have to just forget I ever heard anything Buddhist in my entire life, because I've been thinking in Buddhist ways for so long that my mind has co-opted it in some ways. And Buddhism, or the Dhamma, the freedom that we're seeking, it's not in the suttas. It's not in anything that's written down. In fact, we're not really here for Buddhism, you know. We're here for truth and freedom. happiness, and like love and compassion, and like these are direct, natural experiences, realities that are always right in front of us. And sometimes Buddhism could be an obstacle to that. But just to connect it back to your question, is sometimes your intuition is like, you could call it like the impulse of the impersonal. It's coming to you from like a really true place. And anytime you push away something that's genuine, you're going to suffer for it. You really feel in harmony with what is when you respond openly to its impulse. And making that distinction is the more you trust your intuitive knowing, the stronger it will get, and the weaker the intellectual explaining side of yourself will get. So what I'm saying here is that if you have like a genuine intuition to like to put yourself in the experience of what's happening that's being represented terribly on the news, go ahead and find a way to do that, and like, without allowing the mind to like establish an immediate conclusion, just kind of let it flow through you and do its thing. And just don't try to take control or ownership of that experience, because if you don't try to get involved, then it will be natural. It'll be processed naturally, and then you'll kind of see what gets presented to you after the fact in a way. Like if there's something that you can or need to do, then you can respond in that way. But it might just be revealed that there's nothing that you can do but be aware and empathetic, and it's too big and too deep for Thomas to make a real struggle against. It's like that serenity prayer in AA. They have like God grant me the courage to change the things that what is it? I can't remember it, but it's like I got it from Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-5. God grant me the change.
Oh wow!
Change the things I cannot stand, or to endure the things that I cannot change, and wisdom to know the difference. Something like that. It's
Urge to do that.
It's good advice. I think it's good advice. I can't remember it.
I have a quick question, Mike. You said intuition. I was curious if by trusting our intuition, does it lead to less dukkha?
In my experience, it does. Yeah, even in relation to Buddhism, like when I'm really true to what I call the intuition, I mean, I can't guarantee that means the same thing to you. Everything lightens up and clarifies very quickly as long as I keep following that impulse. But like I said, the danger is that when I say intuition, that may not mean the same to you. You might be like, "Oh, that's my intuition," but it might be, I don't know. Everybody has to figure that out for themselves.
And it's important to remember that we have to, in a way, get down to brass tacks of practice. The Dhamma practice is an action. Remembering to look if there's dukkha there. We change it. How do we do that? By coming back to the breath. Breathe in, relax, and just chill. Cool the mind. Oh, but what about the news? But what about this? But what about this level of dukkha? What about this illusion? What about this? That's all fine as long as it's not causing you dukkha. If you're remembering to look and see if there's dukkha, the news is no problem. Illusions are no problem because you can see clearly. But once they're causing you dissatisfaction, be aware. Remember to look if it's causing you dissatisfaction, whatever it may be, relationships, news, this, that. And once it does, once you're aware that it's causing you dissatisfaction, this is the practice, the action of changing it. How? By remembering that everything's okay here and now and coming back to the breath. and letting your breath be in the here and now be your refuge from the storm of the mind. You cannot fight the storm. It's a phenomenon you can't fight. It is what it is. So many spiritual teachers, they want to give you false hope that you can manipulate this and manipulate that. And the same thing with the material world, materialist. If I get enough money, I'll be happy. If I get enough cars. But you can't do anything with this storm aside from taking refuge here and now in your breath and letting the storm pass. You can watch it out the window and enjoy it, but let it pass. But if you go out there with your shovel and try to fight the lightning and fight the storm, it's never going to work. You're going to get angry. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to have doubt. You're going to have all these dukkha things. And that's okay as long as you're not in battle with it, trying to conquer it and do all these things. Just let it go. Just come back to the breath. Never mind. Start again. And these things can be very subtle too. Like Dhammarato, he gives us the great advice of being aware when we're using terms like I, me, my. And at first it may sound, the middle way. And at first it may sound ridiculous almost. Why do I have to be careful of how I'm talking about saying I? Everybody says I. And you're going to hear me say I. It's not a rule, never say I, never say me. But Dhammarato, he gives us a good guideline. Be aware of the way we're talking. How many times are we saying I or me? And letting that character come back to life. There's these very subtle attachments that if you don't look, you're going to miss them. Very subtle stuff that causes dukkha. But the good news is it's not a big deal. You can become aware of these things with a little tiny bit of practice. Just think about it right now, right where we sit. What's in our minds is causing us dukkha? What attachments do we have? Is there dukkha here? Breathe and relax. Breathe and relax with me and look, see what is the mind gravitating to? What's it gonna, now what, you bullshit mind? Now what are you gonna get me frustrated over? Is there dukkha? No. The truth is everything's fine right where we sit, right where we are. And once this call is done, our minds are going to rush towards some more shit to cling to, and be aware of it. See it. We can talk all day, but if we're not talking about the practice and action, the things we can do, then we're just talking nonsense. What can we do? That's why, as much as I love philosophy, it never answered any question. It gets more questions. The more you answer, the more questions you have. But with the Dhamma practice, it ends all that intellectual mumbo jumbo nonsense. And it brings us back to reality of, oh yeah, don't let the mind carry you away. Come back. Come back to the breath here and now. Oh, I got this, I got that. Never mind. Come back to the breath. That's our practice. If I could do anything, that's what I'd like to help remind us of every time we get together. This action. Simple action, not philosophical.
Right effort.
How much effort? The just amount of effort to change that dukkha into sukha. And something that can bring us comfort is just thinking, there's nothing here worth chasing. It's all anicca, dukkha, anatta. We come back to the breath. Boredom will set in. Disdain will set in. All these things. It's just bullshit. I got to become something. I have to do something. I, me, my. Attention, attention, attention. Craving, bullshit. Questions are the worst. What about this? What about that? Who gives a fuck? How many questions have been answered to us our whole lives? Where are we with all these questions and answers? They're going to end it? No. We could have all the answers we want. We're going to ask more questions and more things. Let all that shit go. We don't need the answers. We don't need more questions. Remember, it's an action. Here and now. Nowhere else. Nowhere in our intellect. Anyways, dudes, I got to get going. Anybody else have anything to say for a couple minutes before we leave? I want to give you guys a chance to say whatever.
Thank you for your answers. Appreciate it.
Thank you again, Dhamma, for hosting.
You guys are awesome, dudes.
Thank you so much.
Still,
Peace and love.
Later.
bye-bye.
Adios.